Hey Olive, Arlo, and Frank. Grandpop coming to you from the living room in JAX Beach, finishing up on the logical fallacy videos. This is video 2. In video 1, we did 5 enablers of logical fallacies, and then we did 15 fallacies. Today we're going to do fallacies 16 through 34, and then we're going to wrap it up by talking about kind of where this all fits into everything. So the first one I want to talk about is given a Latin name, and a lot of these that are from formal logic are known by their Latin name. So if you're talking to somebody who has taken a logic class or been in a debate club or something like that, they'll know the Latin terms for them as well as the English terms. Some of them are just, like the ad hominem. Nobody ever says attacking the person. They say, well, that's an ad hominem attack. We talked about that last time. That's instead of attacking the issue, you're attacking the person who is arguing with you or putting forth the issue. And this is one of those. And maybe that's one reason why they gave it a Latin name. And that's Reductio ad Hitlerum. And you're right, it's Hitlerum is Hitler. So it's reducing your argument to, yeah, that's what Hitler would have done. Or that's exactly what Hitler said. And you hear people do that all the time. Quite often, what they're talking about has nothing to do with what Hitler did or what Hitler said. The next one is othering, and it's something that Hitler actually did do. When you other somebody, you say, you're different than me, therefore you're inferior to me. And that might be ethnic. You're from a different culture, so you're inferior. Or it could be skin color. I'm a white guy. Everybody who's not a white guy is inferior to me. Which is something that Hitler actually did. And, the ultimate is that Hitler blamed everything on the Jews. He got the Germans to buy into that. He othered them. And the end game is that the person that you other for whatever it is, because they don't agree with you, like I'm a libertarian, so I might say, well, you're a Republican. You're inferior to me. Now, as a libertarian, I believe that a lot of the ideas of Republicans are inferior to the ideas that I believe in, the libertarian principles, and same for the Democrats, their side too. A lot of their ideas are inferior, but the people who believe in those ideas are just like me. So you'll see othering all the time, especially now on social media. That's called cancel culture, and they just go like, oh, well, this guy, he doesn't exist anymore. He's deplatformed. There's people like saying, okay, if you want my money in your bank, like a very wealthy person will say, I'm going to take my money out of your bank unless you delist, you get rid of the accounts of all these people who disagree with me. And the banks will go like, well, yeah, I have to because we want to keep this big fish. So they get rid of the small fish. But what winds up happening is there's no fairness in the system. Now, life is not fair, but you can build a system that is fair. And we should always want to do that. And the first thing you want to get rid of is othering. One way that you other people, and this is number 18, is by scapegoating. That's the method that you other people. So that's when you say, okay, the Jews were the problems in after World War I in Germany, and they had a ton of problems, a whole ton of economic problems. So they said, well, there's this class of people that they tend to have more money than everybody else does. And so how did they keep that money when everybody else lost their money? They must be a problem. It goes from they must be a problem to they're inferior to us to they're subhuman. And that was part of what Hitler's whole deal was in Mein Kampf, was that there were certain people, certainly not just Jews, gypsies, Catholics, anybody that lived in Africa, anybody from Eastern Europe, they were all subhumans. And so when you believe somebody's subhuman, you know, you're not going to kick another human being, but you might kick a dog. I'm not saying that you should or that you particularly would, but you'd be much more likely to kick a dog than just some random human being. But if you thought that human being was subhuman, they weren't quite human, then you would do whatever you would do to a dog. The next one is paralysis by analysis, and that is saying, oh, you know, I'd love to make a decision, but I just need more data. It's never the right time to do anything in life. It's never the right time to have a baby, to get married. It's never the right time to start a business. It's never the right time to retire. It's never the right time to start Social Security. It doesn't matter what it is. You can keep arguing your way out of it by saying, oh, but I need more data. I need more data. And next thing you know, you're going to be analyzing something and you'll be 90 years old on your deathbed and going like, I'm real close to making that decision. Since it's never the right time, just do it. Follow your heart. When I've made decisions based on what my heart said, I've always been happier than when I based them on what my head said. So the next is personalization, and that's putting yourself into the situation and saying that you, just because you, are either going to cause failure or success. You know, I just suck at all this stuff, so whenever I'm involved in a project, it goes south. If you're in a project with 5 people, you're 1/5 of either the problem or the solution. So everybody's in it. Some people might be more responsible or less responsible, but just because you're you doesn't mean that good things or bad things are going to happen. Now, the next one is called playing on emotion. And I can already tell that you're going to have questions for me. When you play on people's emotions, you don't set out facts to try to convince them that your argument is correct. You say things like, you know in your heart that it's true. If we let those people come into our neighborhood, crime's going to go up. They don't give you any statistics that if these people come into your neighborhood, crime's going to come up. And they'll go, you know in your heart that that's true. You know I'm telling you the truth. You're probably saying, but Grandpa, didn't you just say you want to make decisions with your heart? No. I said that I never regretted a decision that I made with my heart. But this is completely different. This is somebody else telling you what you feel in your heart. You don't want to make decisions based on somebody else playing on your emotions. You know, they try to figure out triggers that you have to get you to have an amygdala hijack, to be out of control and then make irrational decisions and follow them. A lot of what Hitler did prior to World War II was that. It was playing on emotion. He didn't have any evidence that the Jews were the cause of the problems. But he knew that the people, he could have blamed it on the people that came right before him and the people that were in power with him. They were the problem. But he didn't. Because he needed an enemy to focus people on. He understood that. Now, the next one is the post hoc ergo propter hoc. That's one that says that because every time A happens, B happens, that A must cause B. Here's an example. Every time I go down here to fish, down 22nd Avenue South on the beach, if it's low tide, I catch a pompano. I like pompano. I like catching them. I like eating them. So you'd say, Grandpa, you should go there at low tide. Maybe, maybe not. Just because every time I go there, I catch one at low tide, doesn't mean that me being there at low tide is causing me to catch that fish. You need a lot more evidence than that. Now, maybe pompano bite at low tide, and you can prove that. But like with all these, it might not be untrue what you're saying, what you're trying to convince me of in your argument, because you've used a logical fallacy. It just means that you need to present more evidence. You need to give me, the information. There's whole fishing books that are built on propter hoc arguments. The next one is the red herring. It's number 23, and that's an irrelevant argument. It's attempting to mislead or distract somebody by throwing an argument in there that seems like it's related, but it's not really. And they call it a red herring because back in the days, they used to have fox hunts over in England, and a whole bunch of guys would get on horses with guns, and they'd let a fox loose. And the guys with horses and guns also had dogs. They'd give the fox a 5-minute head start, and the dog had something that smelled like the fox. So the dogs would go, and they'd go out and they'd find the fox, and they'd corner the fox. They'd all get around. They didn't try to eat the fox or anything. They would just corner it, and then some guy on a horse would come up and go, and shoot it. Well, they didn't use pistols. And what people would do supposedly is they'd take a herring, a fish, a stinky fish, and they would drag it across the trail. And the foxes would get to that stinky fish and go like, oh, and they'd start to go after the fish. If they left the fish there, they'd eat the fish, and it would cause them to lose the scent. So that's what happens when you do a red herring. You're presenting a false argument to draw people's attention away. Now, the next one is very, very similar to the red herring. It's called a non sequitur. And it's offering evidence or reasons that have no logical connection to the argument. Now, the other one, they may have had some connection, but it was meant to distract. This is just meant to block. Like, you're just arguing to argue. Non sequiturs are one of the things that if somebody is arguing from ignorance, they use a lot of non sequiturs to go, yeah, but how about this? What does that have to do with it? The next is reductionism. That's number 25. And reductionism is giving very simple answers to very complex problems. There's one famous one. There was a man, he was a football player. And he had retired. He had become a movie star. His name he's still alive, although he's out of jail. He's been out of jail for a couple of years. He was accused of killing his wife and lover, stabbing them to death. And they found gloves at the scene. So the police took the gloves, put them into evidence. And he had this famous lawyer named Johnny Cochran. And Johnny Cochran took the gloves and said, "Mr. Simpson, will you try one of the gloves on?" And the glove was too small for him. And Johnny Cochran looked at the jury and said, "If the glove don't fit, you must acquit." Well, OJ did actually get acquitted. I don't know how much that had to do with it. But really, there was a much bigger argument. And sometimes a reductionist argument is genius. That guy was seen as one of the best attorneys of his era. Thunderstorms rolling in. The next is shifting the burden of proof. And that is that that I make a claim and I tell you that it's up to you to prove that I'm wrong. Well, if I'm making a claim, if I'm saying, the sky is purple, I should be able to present you with some solid evidence of that. But that's what people do. It's like some people think that the pyramids were built by aliens. And so people that believe that, okay, well, you can't prove it. They weren't. Well, okay. I don't know. Who cares? But you can't shift the burden of proof to me to prove that they didn't do it. If you believe they did, you'll be a world-class star if you can prove that beyond a reasonable doubt that aliens built the pyramids. The next one is the slippery slope. And slippery slope is, and there's another one that's the opposite of that, which is mountains from molehills, where if you start down a certain road, you're going to just keep going further and further into it. The big example that was always used during my lifetime was the Vietnam War. We got into the Vietnam War because communism was spreading in Southeast Asia. And we said, well, if it's not stopped in Southeast Asia, then it's going to keep going, and it's going to make it to South America and to North America, to the United States. Well, it was already in all those places anyway. But that's the thing. Oh, we got to stop it here. So we lose 50,000 American lives in a war that we didn't even win. For what? Communism is where it is. It's everywhere. That's one it's also sort of a call to emotion, because you're saying to people, oh, if we let this ethnicity into our neighborhood, like, whoa, next thing you know, you're not going to be able to pick your kids out. Or no, actually, you'll be able to pick your kids out really, really easy, because they'll look different than everybody else. The next one is the snow job. And this is something that people use this all the time. Saying, yeah, you're snowing me. Well, the snow job is this. It's bombarding people with a mountain of evidence. And that evidence may be marginally true, marginally applicable. But if you had if you had the evidence to prove whatever it is you're trying to prove, you wouldn't have to do that. Here's a perfect example. After September 11th, 2001, when the bin Laden caused that attack on the World Trade Center, we decided that we were going to go in and start a war in Iraq. And they, in order for the United States to go into war, the way that it's supposed to work is that Congress has to vote. They have to declare war. And the last time that we did that, even though we've been in wars since then, is in Iraq. And I believe we went in there in early 2003. We sent a guy, he had been a general, his name was Colin Powell. He then was Secretary of Defense maybe. They sent him to Congress. And he made all these arguments, like a 12-point argument, saying that they had weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We got there, we didn't find any weapons. Now maybe they had them, like with anything else. Just because he did a snow job doesn't mean that he was incorrect. But when you do a snow job and then we get there and we don't find any weapons of mass destruction, once again, we've lost all these lives, and not just on our side. Like when we go into war, the other side's losing lives too. Their lives are worth as much as ours. And we went to war on a fallacious argument based on a snow job by a very moralistic, a man that I've looked up to since I started following him. I believe he's still alive. But he made a fallacious argument. We needed more information, better information. The next is an appeal to authority, and this is something that people do in many ways. They'll say, well, you have to do this because doctors say that it's the right thing to do. Well, how many doctors? Well, this guy's a doctor, and he said to do it. Oh, so one doctor said that. Well, but he's a doctor, and so he should know what's good for your health. So whatever the thing is, take vitamins, wear a mask during the pandemic, whatever. Like, well, this guy said you have to do it, and he's an authority. But it goes to absurd levels where people buy like orange juice based on the fact that some crazy actor drinks it. Like, oh yeah, well this guy drinks this orange juice, so it's got to be good. And like, even if 100% of doctors said to do something, they could still be wrong. Like with everything else, they might be right. You need more evidence. The next one up is the straw man. It's number 30. And the straw man is an interesting one. It means that you set up an argument yourself. Politicians do this all the time. You set up like, well, my opponent said this, and then you beat down that argument like bam, bam, bam. My opponent said this, but here's the facts. When in fact your opponent didn't say anything. It wasn't a real man making that argument. It was a straw man, like what do they call those guys? A scarecrow out in the cornfield, scaring the birds away. It's a straw man argument. A famous one was former President Barack Obama. When he was running for office, he was the first black guy that had a legitimate shot at becoming president. So as he was going around the country, he would say, you know what they say about us, what they say about me. He doesn't look like the guys whose faces are on the money. Well, no, he doesn't look like the guys whose faces are on the money, although he might be on some money at some point in time. But nobody was saying that. That was just him presenting a straw man argument and then defeating that straw man argument. Like, well, why shouldn't I be president? Just because I don't look like them. Well, nobody was saying that. Nobody was saying because you don't wear a powder puff wig like George Washington and, that, and have wooden teeth, that you shouldn't become president. The next is taboo. And that is to make any position certain. So what you say is, well, you can't argue that. Nothing is taboo. You know how I believe that Jesus is God. But I can't tell you that you can't argue against that to me. Like, oh, that's taboo. And a lot of times it happens in a corporate setting. We don't argue that here. Like, this is how we do it. This guy's always right, or this issue is always approached this way. And it shouldn't be. Question everything. The things in life that you believe in that are really true will win in the end. If you look at the evidence rationally, you'll go for the truth. It's when you get sidelined by things like all these logical fallacies that you run amok of the truth. Is it a muck or a foul? I think a muck. The next one is the sunk cost fallacy. And that is that you lose money on something, so you keep plowing money in because you go, wow, we can't abandon this now. We have to reverse our losses. Well, no, you need to take your losses and get out. When something goes south, just bail. I'm not talking about relationships with other people or anything like that. I'm talking about when something costs you something, like usually money. If it starts going south, get out. Get out as quickly as possible, unless you can fix it, and usually you can't fix it. By fix it, I'm not talking about, well, I made this investment and it's going south, so I'm going to just pump money into it. If it's a company that you're involved with and you say, okay, I need to pump some more money in and do these other things, that's completely different. Because usually when you lose something and you pump more money into it, you're going to lose more. So, there's that. Okay, we're in the down stretch now. We're to Kokwe. You do it too. But it's even more than that. It's an ad hominem attack. And it's, if you accuse somebody of stealing. I think that this other politician was stealing, and here's my evidence for that. And then that politician comes back and goes, well, I heard that you cheat on your wife. And I heard that one time you took a deduction from taxes that you shouldn't have. So it's not a pure ad hominem attack. You're actually picking out facts, and some of them may even have to do with that type of argument, like ethics. You're not ethical. Well, you're not ethical either. Maybe the person saying you're not ethical is correct. Maybe you're not ethical, but the argument is that he's not ethical. So just whatever you did has nothing to do with it, unless his argument is, you caused me to be unethical because you did something. That's completely different. That's not a tukokwe. A tukokwe is, yeah, you too. You either did the exact same thing, or you did something similar, or you did something else just as bad. And a lot of times it's like you say, you did something that was worse. You did something worse than me. Okay. That doesn't disprove whether you did what I'm saying you did. It's another one of these things where if you don't present evidence, it devolves into an argument of two people going, yeah, I'm right. No, I'm right. Don't waste your time with stuff like that. And then there's something that I call the pre-coke way. That's not a real one. It's one that I made up. And that's when you accuse somebody of doing something that you've done. Like, you accuse somebody of stealing, and you talk about it all the time in front of your boss. You go like, this guy's stealing from the company. I know he's stealing from the company. I can't prove it. And it puts all this focus on that guy because you're saying, oh, yeah, I know he's stealing. And all the while, you're stealing. But you're hoping that nobody focuses on you because you're putting the focus on this other guy. The next and final logical fallacy is chronocentrism. And that is that one time is better than another. So they can play out different ways. And I'm sure there's slightly different terms for whether you're going forward or backwards. We know more now. Or, you have to do this because I learned this now, and you're using something from the past. We know more now. And the opposite of that is like, well, you need to do something, not the way they do it now. You need to do it the way that they did 500 years ago, because they were so much wiser back then. Either of those things could be true, but you're not going to win the argument based on them. They're logical fallacies. So, what can you do to combat logical fallacies? The first thing is to identify them in your own thinking. And after you've started doing that, identify them in the thinking of others. And when you talk to me, sometimes you'll hear me say, like, that's an ad hominem attack. You got to come up with something better. Or to coke way. I'm saying that you're committing a logical fallacy. So after you've started to figure them out in your own life, then you can start to figure them out in others. So in the arguments of others, in the positions that others have taken. And then when you have someone trying to convince you of something, or you're arguing in your own head for a decision that you have to make, what you want to do, let's use first when somebody's trying to convince you of something. The default of human beings is to listen to respond. You hear them saying stuff, you go, oh, I don't like this, I don't know exactly why, I want to respond. Boom, as soon as they're done, your mouth opens up and words start flying out. It's not the way to do things. Stephen Covey, who wrote the 7 principles of highly effective people. It's one of my favorite books. I can't remember the exact title right now. I'm an old man. Forgive me. The 7 habits of highly effective people. It says, listen to understand and then respond. So that's what you should do. When somebody's making an argument, you're never going to be able to figure out if they're arguing logically or illogically if you're just trying to rebut them. You want to listen. Sometimes they'll talk forever, but when you get the floor, you need to say, I let you talk for 10 minutes. Now let me tell you what I feel. And if you have time, Like, say you're trying to decide who to vote for or something, and you're listening to speeches that guys are making and reading newspaper articles, internet articles about them. Start to break those things down. What's this person's thesis statement? What are they trying to say? The United States is going to go to war in Iraq. What's Colin Powell's thesis statement? His thesis statement is there's weapons of mass destruction there. If we don't go get them, then they're going to use them against us. So then take the supporting arguments and write them down and subject them to, first off, is this a logical fallacy? And if it is, you have to discount it. Can't prove things with a logical fallacy. You can't disprove them either. That's a logical fallacy in and of itself when you say, yeah, no, you committed a logical fallacy, so what you're saying is not true. Now, it might be true, you just need more evidence. And then think deeply. Test things. Test them to prove them. Even your deeply held beliefs. Test them. Ask people questions. Listen to what they say. Take it into consideration. If what you believe is true, it's true. It will survive the test. And like I said, when you're in the midst of doing this, if people use logical fallacies, it doesn't invalidate the point. It just means you don't have, you just throw it out. You go, okay, well, come up with something better than that. I'm willing to listen to you, but you didn't prove it. That was a logical fallacy. Identify them just in logical fallacies, just in general. Like, not even when you're trying to figure something out or you're arguing with somebody. If you're watching a podcast or watching the news or reading some opinion piece in the Huffington Post or something like that, try to identify them. Print them out. And then go point by point. Say, okay, here's the thesis statement. This is what they're trying to prove. And here's the arguments that they're putting forth. How many logical fallacies are in here? Oh, here's a tu quoque. Here's an ad hominem. Here's a propter hoc. And then say, well, I kind of agreed with this, but now not so much. You still might look into it further and agree with it eventually, but you'll be better founded in your belief. You can use this in every part of life. When you're buying a car, here's some examples. You go in to buy the car, and you say, I want to buy a car, and the guy shows you this car, and you go, well, that's not really the kind of car that I'm here to get. And they say, oh, well, everybody's buying this car. This is the most popular car on the market. That's the bandwagon effect. And one thing, and this is one of the biggest things, is when people are arguing things and you pick out a logical fallacy to go, like, that's a logical fallacy, because it blows their mind. Most people have no idea what you're talking about. You say that's illogical. What you're saying is it's called the bandwagon effect. You're saying that I should buy this because everybody buys it, but that has nothing to do with whether that's a good car or not. Or, oh, you want this? Tom Cruise drives one of these. Jennifer Lopez drives one of these. Well, that's an appeal to authority. It doesn't mean you're going to like the car. These are millionaires. So maybe, the car could break down every week and they don't care. Money means nothing to them. And then here's one here. I saw your trade in. You better buy this today, or you're going to be walking around, walking to work and stuff like that pretty soon. Well, that's um, creating a false dilemma. You know, you're saying, hey, there's only two things here. You either buy this car, or this other car is going to break down and you're going to be walking to work. Well, even if your car is on its last legs and there's some truth to that, maybe you'll get that car fixed instead of buying a new car. Maybe you'll buy another car that's better for you than this car. So you call people out on these things, it's not going to change their minds. But at least when you explain to them that, no, I don't agree with you because you used this logical fallacy. Like, I'm not going to buy this car because you did the bandwagon effect, a call to authority, and you created a false dilemma. Like, you didn't tell me anything that convinced me to buy this car. They may not agree with you. Guys are going to be upset because you didn't buy the car from them. But they're going to understand why. So we're at the end of this. I don't want to do a whole wrap up because I've been rapping on and on the whole time. But we started this, we've done 34 logical fallacies, and before that we did 5 enablers. And before that, we looked at 2 things about human beings, Freud's pleasure principle and Jung's shadow, that make us who we are. We have to constantly guard against that. Understanding these 34, and there's more than 34, trust me. Understanding these 34 and putting them into your quiver of arrows, your quiver of rhetorical arrows, is going to make you better adapted to survive in current society, where there's tons of information just flying around and people are doing all kinds of crazy things based on illogical information. Study them, identify them, and keep them out of your game. Peace out, guys.